Hello, welcome to week 10 lecture 49. So, today I will talk about language endangerment. Language endangerment is a very important and serious topic, and nowadays we see not only linguists, but other research scholars, different corporate companies, and of course, the government of different countries all are working together in saving languages. So, what do we mean by language endangerment? That is what we will discuss today. So, I will begin with defining what is language endangerment, what do we actually mean by language endangerment, the causes of language endangerment, domains of language use, language shift, and stages of language endangerment. Because to understand language endangerment, we also need to know about different other things related to language, like the domains of language use, language shift, and all about these. So, what do we mean by language endangerment? Like any other species that we talk about and we say that this particular species is getting endangered, in the same way we also talk about language endangerment. So, what we mean is that when it is predicted that a particular language is going to become extinct in the future, that means that this language has become endangered. This language is going to die or become extinct. So, why does that happen? That happens when the speakers shift to other languages. They stop using their own mother tongue, their own native language. So, that happens due to various different reasons. Many languages actually fail out and are being replaced by the other dominant languages of a particular area. So, when we say these dominant languages replace or takes the place of the minor or endangered languages, then of course, there are reasons for that. We will discuss that. So, you can think about Khota speakers shifting to Hindi speaking. So, maybe a Khota speaking parents will like their children to only speak Hindi, English and other languages, but not Khota. Similarly, for Mahali, Mahali speakers are trying to shift to other languages. They do not want their children to learn Mahali, they rather like talking in Bangla. So, why does that happen? And when these speakers, when Mahali speakers slowly trying to shift towards Bangla, of course, it is not a one day process or 1 year process, it takes time. So, what happens? The parents, they do not want their children to learn say Mahali. So, these children when they grow up, they do not know Mahali or know little bit of Mahali which they have heard their parents speaking, but they themselves they can't speak, they are not fluent in it. And then they have nothing to pass on to their children. So, their children they just have no idea about Mahali. So, what will happen eventually, that there will be no speakers left who can speak Mahali, because the older generation they will become old and then they will die, and then there will be no one who can actually converse in this language. So, that is what we mean by language endangerment and language death. So, a language is said to be dead when no one actually speaks it anymore. So, there might be some documents or some textbooks written in the language, but if no one speaks the language, in real life if no one is using the language, that means the language is dead. So, it has been said that India has around 196 endangered languages, including about 80 in the northeast, according to the UNESCO Atlas of World's Languages in Danger. So, you can go into and look into this atlas, you can give name of your own language and search based on that. So, this is an atlas which actually shows all the languages, most of the languages of the world and their state, whether they are vulnerable or they are endangered or what. So, they have actually different levels for that. So, the speakers of smaller languages, less dominant languages, stop using their own language and they shift to the major language of the area. That is what is called language shift. So, they prefer the other language, they prefer the other dominant language due to various other reasons. Maybe because books are available in that language, maybe because more means of entertainment is available in that language. So, there can be different reasons for them to shift, but when they actually use the other language more than their own native language, then we can see a shift in the language. Parents may begin to use only the second language with their children. So, they may not want their own native language to be transferred or transmitted to the next generation, and then the next generation they do not know their language. So, in the long process what happens, no speakers are left who can actually speak their own language. So, in this state the language becomes dormant or extinct, because there is no one left. So, if there are records, there are written records like textbooks or some records are there, but no one actually speaks the language, then also it is considered to be dead language. So, it is also said that if there is some documentation of the language, so if there are books, there are audios of the language, collection of the songs, folklores, then that actually helps in reviving a language. So, when a language dies, it can again be revived back, though the process is not very easy, but it in some cases we have seen that cases like this has happened, where there was no speakers left who could speak the language, but with the help of the documented materials, those who could actually identify themselves with that community, they started learning the language, and slowly the language was revitalized. It again came back to existence and people started speaking that language. So, language death is a serious issue, as along with the language death, the related culture and the indigenous knowledge system is also related. So, its language is not in isolation. When we talk about language, we talk in language, right. So, whatever we are talking about is the knowledge system. So, every language, every culture, community has its own folklores, has its own knowledge system, everything is actually stored through the language. So, when the language is lost, these terms are also lost, and so it is very important to maintain the language. Moreover, it has also been seen that there is a direct relation between cultural and linguistic diversity and biodiversity. So, when we see in the places where linguistic diversity has decreased, it was also seen that it has affected the biodiversity as well. So, both are related. So, language is not in isolation, it is part of the culture, it is part of lots of more things, like where in a particular geography where a particular language is spoken, in that language we can describe the geography of that area, but maybe it is difficult to do that in some other language, because there might not be terms in the other language to describe various features which are present in that geographical area. So, that is why it is again important to save languages from dying. So, now when we talk about language and speakers, we can see that we can talk little bit about the statistics. What we can see here is that estimated number of languages in the world is around 7,000, but the size and the distribution of languages across the world are uneven. So, that means that 40% of the world's population speak only 10 languages of the world. So, what about the other languages? So, it has also been said that 96% of the world's population only speaks 4%. Then think about the other languages, it is only spoken by the 4%. So, that makes this scenario very difficult. That means that the dominant language is actually spoken by the majority, and that is why it gets more and more power, because most of the people are speaking that language. In that case, we see that there is a natural tendency of the speakers of minor languages to shift towards the dominant language, because it is spoken by the most of the people. That is why we see more facilities available in that language. when we talk about language technology, we can see that language technology is available for the dominant languages. Because when you talk about language technology, sometimes people think we should develop those technologies which can actually help most of the people. So, when we are talking about most of the people or majority of the people, then again we will talk about the dominant language. We will not talk about the minor languages or endangered languages, because they are spoken by few of them. So, when someone will try to develop a language technological support for a language, then one might think that it should help more and more people, and that is why it should be developed in the dominant language. And then what happens? The speakers of the minor languages, they feel an indirect pressure to shift towards the dominant language. They might want to use those available language technologies, but that is not available in their own language. So, what will they do? They shift to the dominant language in which these facilities are available. And not only about language technology, for entertainment, for education, for every subfields you can see that. So, for entertainment also, those who are creating these means of entertainment like films or other things, or who are publishing newspapers or journals, they will also want more and more readership or more viewership. For that, again they will try to aim for the dominant language, so that more and more people watch or read their creation. So, again the result is that we do not find much means of entertainment for the minor or endangered languages. And then again these community members of endangered or minor languages, they are forced to use or read the books written in dominant languages. So, this is the scenario. So, when we talk about the causes of language endangerment, 4 main categories has been given. So, one is the natural catastrophes, like there can be natural disasters, earthquake or certain things which can happen, and like tsunami in Andaman Islands. So, they can actually wipe away a whole community, a whole speech community vanishes in one night, and when it vanishes, of course, the language also dies with them. So, suddenly something happens and a whole community is washed away from the face of earth. So, along with them they take away their language. There can be war and genocide. So, there can be war between two communities and one community is totally finished. Then their language can also die with them. If there are no speakers left, or if 1 or 2 speakers left, then also the language can eventually die out. There can be overt repression. What does that mean? Often in the name of unity or assimilation, what happens? Sometimes governments, they try to force different communities in using one particular language. So, there can be organizations which can actually force different language speakers to speak one language, to maybe because they think that that can help them creating unity, or they want to merge them into one community. So, there may be 10 smaller communities, 10 smaller speech communities, but there can be one organization or government of a nation which can want to merge them all into one. And because so that they do not have any dispute among themselves, they do not have competitions among themselves, they all become one. And what happens in the process, that one language is given upon them, is forced on them. So, they are forced to use that one particular language, and then they can't use their own language, and that way they shift away from their own language. So, cultural, political and economic dominance, this is the most important and most common factor that we find in language endangerment. For example, Mahali, as I talked about, or Maghi in India are dominated by the languages of the area. So, when Maghi speakers, they speak in Maghi, the children when they speak in Maghi, then the parents in many of the times say that please do not speak in this language, rather speak in Hindi. Why? Because Hindi is related with prestige, Hindi is taken as the language of educated people, But when we talk about Maghi, Maghi is taken as the language of not so cultured people, not so literate people. So, this is actually the conception. So, this has nothing to do with the truth value, but it is the conception of the people. People think like that. And when the community members, they themselves feel like that, they themselves have a very negative attitude towards their own language, then they do not want the language to be passed on from one generation to other. They do not want their children to learn their native language, rather they want them to learn some other prestigious language. So, in that case what happens? There is a shift. So, I will talk a little more about it. When we talk about economic dominance, what do we see? That for these minor smaller communities, they at times do not have enough means to earn money. So, they live in smaller rural areas and then they are forced to shift to bigger cities in search of economy, in search of money, in search of job. So, when they migrate, of course, when they migrate they have to learn the language of the cities, the dominant language there, and in the process their own language, their own culture is left behind. So, maybe they go there, they settle down there, and the next they can speak their language, but the next generation slowly starts shifting to the dominant language of the area. So, that is one thing. Another thing that we see, it is again very common, to improve local economy at times tourism is promoted a lot. In the smaller villages, there the guest house are made and tourists they visit the places, not only tourists, even researchers they visit the places, and along with that they carry their own culture, their own language, which is learned by these community members, and they want to imitate those, they want to learn those, maybe because those their lifestyle, their language seems more attractive, more prestigious, and that is why they want to slowly there can be a shift in that. So, while talking about economic dominance, I will give you an example of Mahali community. They used to make bamboo baskets, till now they do that. So, they are a smaller communities of West Bengal. So, some Mahali people they also live in Orissa. So, these people they are also known as basket making communities. So, they make basket bamboos and they sell that and earn from it. It was fine, but what happened nowadays we see more and more use of plastic baskets. So, plastic baskets are cheaper, more durable, so people prefer that, they do not buy bamboo baskets. So, what happens nowadays their traditional the traditional job has been affected, no one is buying their baskets, and that is why they can't earn enough. Earlier their earning was fine for them, for their livelihood, but now it is becoming difficult, and that is why the parents they are sending their children in the cities for higher education. They do not want them to sit there and make baskets and learn the art of making baskets, rather they want them to go and study in the cities. So, when they go in the cities, they study there, they learn their language, maybe Bangla, Hindi, English. So, they learn these languages, but somewhere Mahali is left behind. They do not use it on daily basis, sometimes with their parents when they come back to their village or over the phone, but other times they are using the other languages. And when they have their own children, they have very few information about the language to pass on to their offspring. So, their offspring do not learn much of the Mahali from their parents, and then if we look down 3 or 4 generations, we see that the language can actually die out. Not only for studying they are going to these urban cities, for in search of job also they are going to the bigger cities. So, that can actually affect their language. When we talk about cultural dominance, we see that education and literature of the major language or of the dominant language is generally being taught. So, that is a cultural difference. Moreover, when we see that these minor community speakers are surrounded by the dominant language speakers, there is a tendency that they also want to imitate the cultural aspect of the dominant language. So, that can be very easily seen. Another thing which has become very common nowadays is, so it is the showcasing of the cultural activity of the minor communities. So, in the different functions or in different organizations, they invite these community people who speak minor languages, and they ask them to showcase their cultural activities, maybe through dance, through various other performances. So, what happens is that these particular performances are just commodified, they are just there to showcase, and actually the cultural aspect is not followed or not maintained in the community, rather it just becomes a thing which is actually showed to the tourists. So, tourists go there, they show it, they enjoy it, or they are invited somewhere in different functions and there they perform, and then that is enjoyed by the others, but then actually it is not practiced. So, there can be different types of songs like fishing song and all those. So, maybe fishing song is actually not sung by the community anymore, but they only perform it on the stage or perform it for the tourists. So, you might think, what is the problem with that? Anyway, they are practicing it. No, the problem is that these performers, they just have learnt it, memorized it, and then they are performing it. They know the steps, they know the words. But if you want them, if you want the meaning of the words from them, they can't say it. In the most of the cases, they can't. They just know that much, as much they need to perform. And when actually it is performed by the fisherman on the boat, then it also becomes more creative. People add more to it, and it goes on. The next generation learns it and all. But when it is folklorized, then it is only limited. There is no new creation to it. It becomes more commodified rather than real practice of the language, because language is more about performance. It is not only about showcasing. When we talk about political aspect, then education policies which ignore or exclude local languages or do not give recognition to the minor languages, or at times it can also ban certain minor languages, that can actually affect a language. So, there can be some political policies depending on which one cannot use one's native language in public space, or one cannot talk in that language in official places. So, if those type of things are there, then that actually demotivates the speakers from speaking their own language. There can be historical reasons like colonization, boundary disputes, all of these can actually affect the language. Historical example, we can also look about a community. There is a community in Bengal which was termed as a criminal tribe by the colonizers. So, they gave this tribe the nickname of criminal tribe. So, when a particular tribe is being named as criminal tribe, of course, the members will not want to identify themselves with that tribe, and that is the result why these speakers, these people, they do not want to identify with the community, they do not want to speak their language, they want to shift to other community, they want new identity, new language, because of this historical reason. Because the moment they name their tribe, people will think that, oh, they are from that criminal tribe, because they were named like that. So, these type of things can also force people to shift to other languages. And then there can be attitudinal thing, like minority language speakers do not feel great talking in their own language, or they may have negative attitude towards their language. So, they want to get associated with the dominant language, because the perception of the community members or the other community members towards them can be that, oh, the speakers of this language are generally illiterate, are generally poor. So, when this type of attitude is related with a particular community, then what do we see? There grows a negative attitude towards the language, and the speakers, they do not want to speak the language. In contrast to that, what we see is that dominant languages are related with more prestige and more power. So, people want to relate to those languages. Now, we can quickly look at the case of Dhimal. So, in Dhimal you can see, when I talked about cultural influence, Dhimal people earlier used to worship trees, rocks, hills, basically nature, and the one who helped in this process was called Dhami, who was the local priest. But due to the neighboring communities, nowadays Dhimal people have started worshipping idols. They have created their own temple and then they worship there, and that is why they now call the person who performs all this as Pujari. So, slowly what is happening is that the word Dhami is being replaced by the word Pujari along with the cultural shift. So, we can see both, there is a cultural shift and also linguistic shift. So, both are actually dependent on each other. We see a language shift which can result in cultural shift and cultural shift which can actually result in language shift. We also need to talk about domains of language use. When we talk about domains of language use, it was proposed by Fishman, who describes it like participants, topics, location, right. So, the more domains a language can be used in is the healthier language. So, if we can use our language in different domains, in more and more domains, then that means our language is quite healthy. But if we can't use our language in different domains, we can use it in only one or two domains, then it has a tendency of getting endangered. Now, if we talk about Kurmali, we know that Kurmali, one can talk within their family, one can talk about health issues, and one can use Kurmali in home. Also in locality near their house with the local shopkeeper, discussing politics and all those. In the shop, Kurmali can be used. But when we see more professional domains, like in the domain of education, in the location of university or in the hospitals, they can't use their language. If they can't use their language, that means there is restricted domain. Only the language can be used for certain purpose. It can't be used for, say, education, it can't be used for other official purpose. If the scenario is like that, then the language has the tendency of getting endangered. But in the case of Kurmali, we do see that in educational domain also it can be used. Kurmali is being taught in different universities. So, it is not the case. But here you can also see that Hindi can be used in all the different domains. Hindi can be used with professors, doctors for discussing topics like education, health, all these things Hindi can be used. At the same time, Hindi can also be used with family members, with shopkeepers. So, Hindi can be used in the domains where Kurmali can be used, but at times Kurmali can't be used in the domains where Hindi can be used. That means Kurmali has a lesser space than Hindi. So, when we see that lesser space, that means there is a force to shift. Again, coming back to Dhimal, you can see Dhimal is a Tibeto-Burman language spoken in West Bengal, Darjeeling district. Here what you can see, for Dhimal speakers to get education, they are forced to learn Bangla, English, Hindi or Nepali, right. In the marketplace they generally use Bangla, for official purpose they generally use Bangla or Hindi or also Nepali, and for entertainment also they use Bangla, Hindi and Nepali. So, for all these different domains they can't use Dhimal. Dhimal they can use only with their friends and family members inside their own village. So, the moment they go out of the village for various other purpose, like for getting education, for entertainment and all, they have to shift to other language. Even within their village, when they are watching televisions or listening to radios, they shift to other languages, because we do not see any programs in Dhimal, or we do not in radios or in televisions. We do not see any journals or newspapers in Dhimal, right. So, there is the domain of Dhimal use is narrower compared to the other language. Again coming to Mahali and Hindi example, the same thing you can see. Hindi can be used for entertainment, education, office, but in contrast to that, Mahali can only be used in the home domain. So, clearly the domain of one language is very wide, but the domain of other language is quite narrow. So, when the domain actually is very narrow or it shrinks, then that shows that a language is actually getting endangered. Now, talking about different stages of endangerment. So, as I mentioned, endangerment is a process, it takes time. So, slowly if the domains are getting decreased, slowly the speakers are shifting, then the language slowly becomes endangered. There are different stages before a language actually dies out. So, a language can be potentially endangered, seriously endangered, moribund, and then it actually finishes, it dies, it is extinct. A language is potentially endangered, it faces strong external pressure, but the language is still spoken by the younger generation. But a language is said to be endangered when only a few people can speak the language, while the children are no more learning the language. If the children are not learning, that means the language is becoming endangered, because after some time these adult people will become old and they will die out. So, who will speak the language? So, if the children are not speaking, that means the language is endangered. It becomes seriously endangered. During this stage, the language is unlikely to survive another generation and will very soon be extinct. So, maybe the middle aged people are there who can speak the language, other people can't speak. So, these or the older people, there are a few older people who can speak it. So, then that is seriously endangered. And we say a language is moribund when only very old people, like the people of grandparents generation, are there who can speak the language. So, they are anyway old. So, maybe some of them have forgotten some of the things because of old age, and then they do not have many people to speak with, because only they can speak. So, there are say 5 or 6 older people who can speak the language. One by one each of them dies, and then there is 1 or 2 left. So, the language they can't use with anyone, and then the language is moribund. And this is actually a very serious time when we can actually save the language, when we can record from them and then again start revitalizing the language. But then after that there is no scope, because the language becomes extinct, and extinction is the step where no speakers are there, no one actually speaks the language, and so the language actually dies because there is no speaker left. So, you can see how actually there are different processes through which it passes on before getting totally extinct. So, there are stages like potentially endangered, endangered and seriously endangered. A language can be saved if it is still in these three, in either of these 3 steps. But if it is moribund, it becomes little difficult to save it, and of course, after it becomes extinct, there is no question of saving it, though there can be rare chances of revitalizing it. So, these are the stages of endangerment. So, I hope you enjoyed today's class, and you can think about the languages which are surrounding you. So, can you think of any language which you think is minor or which is actually getting or may get endangered? You can explore little bit in your neighborhood about the different languages. So, you go through these readings. I hope you enjoyed today's class. Thank you.